Pardon? Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, it's you're not really. It's still not very loud for one thing, and then why don't you just speak for a period of time? I can tell you.
All right. Well, okay. Let's try this again.
Yeah,
Um,
it is
yeah,
still, unfortunately, it's still a problem, Hillary. I don't know if others agree. I'm having trouble understanding you. Yeah, I think everyone is. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
we're having trouble. I'm having to strain to figure out what you're saying.
Huh, okay.
Very garbled.
And yeah, Karen, if you could get John, that would be really helpful and see if he can bring me in headset. Okay. This is the problem.
James is in the office, so I'll ask him to come up and see your computer.
Okay, thank you so much. So while we're waiting for me to deal with my headset, perhaps we could go ahead and go through introductions. There are a few members who are not able to attend today. So I did want to take a moment to communicate that these meeting dates were selected simply based on the date with the most positive doodle responses. And there are two members who asked for alternates to participate on their behalf today. So we'll be introducing Oliver and Sid a little bit later on. And while we understand that folks are very busy, we would like to encourage members to attend for consistency's sake and a continued flow in that dialogue. So with this, and while I'm having a little bit of mic issues, maybe we can go ahead and go through introduction. So why don't we start with DLCD staff, Gordon and Casaria. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hello, everyone. I'm Gordon Howard. I'm the Community Services Division Manager with Department of Land Conservation Development.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Casaria Taylor. I'm the Rules Coordinator for DLCD.
Great, and Commissioner Boyer is also our liaison for this particular Rulemaking Advisory Committee. Commissioner Boyer, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, but I think I want Alexis to go ahead of me. Alexis Hammer, please.
Thanks, Commissioner Boyer, and great to see everyone. This is Alexis Hammer. I'm the Legislative and Policy Manager at the LCD, and I'm out in Malheur County on the road, so I'm going to be potentially in and out of this meeting. But thank you.
Good morning, I'm Barbara Boyer. I'm a LCDC member, and I'm your liaison, and I report back to the Commission, and thank you all for your time today.
Right. And so now we'll go through introductions alphabetically and ask you to introduce yourselves, your organization, if you are representing one, and briefly state, what you hope to take from the meeting today. So going through the list alphabetically, Elizabeth Bowles.
Good morning, Elizabeth Bowles. I'm the planning manager for Lynn County and hoping to get out of this meeting some clarification, the definition of processing. I'm very looking forward to that conversation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And then Amber Bell.
Good morning, I'm Amber Bell. I'm the planning director with Lane County, and hope to just hear everyone's perspectives on the draft rules this morning.
Looks like.
And then after Amber, we have Austin Burns. Is Austin with us today?
Austin, we can't hear you. We still can't hear you, although you're not muted on our. No, sorry. Let's.
Awesome. Well, I guess
Oh, okay. We've got you now.
Oh, sweet. Just press all the buttons. Cool. I'm also principal planner at Marion County Public Works, and I'm hoping to get out of this meeting new perspectives on farm forest regulations and kind of what other people think and best practices around the state.
All right, great. Thank you for being here, Austin. Is this new headset working better?
Still not great.
Still not great.
It's just still there's the sound is better. There's just some distortion. I'm not sure why.
There's some
Maybe you could call in on your phone.
And so after Austin, we have Blair Batson.
Hi, I'm Blair Batson. I'm a staff attorney with 1000 Friends of Oregon. Looking forward to today's discussion.
Great. Thank you, Blair. And Charles Bennett.
There, by the way, you're perfect.
Yeah, that worked. Whatever.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm Charles Bennett with Jackson County, Southern Oregon here, and yeah, I'm glad we can hear you, everybody. And Hillary, that's wonderful. So hopefully we'll get some more clarity in the rest of the rules too. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Charles. And with Jim Johnson with ODR.
Hello, everyone. Jim Johnson. I'm the Land Use and Water Planning Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I hope to hear everybody's perspectives on this and see where this goes. And just real quick, Alyssa Boyles, I owe you a call back. I've been out of the office a couple of days, so I'll be back to you earlier this week.
All right. Thanks, Jim. And Jan Lee.
Yes, I'm Jan Lee. I'm on the board of the Clackamas Soil and Water District and president of the State Association. And I hope that we come up with some good guidance that is acceptable to the planners so they can do their job the best way possible.
Thank you, Jan. And Justin Green.
Good morning, Justin Green. I'm an environmental and policy consultant. I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation and also learning what our new charge is going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. And is Ken on with us this morning? I don't think he was going to be here. Okay. And Lauren Poor, Farm Bureau.
Good morning, everyone. Lauren Poor, Oregon Farm Bureau. Yeah, I'm a little disappointed to see some important members of our RAC missing today. I like to have everyone in attendance so we can have some robust discussion, and I think we're missing some key voices in the discussion today. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Lauren. And Maitri.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maitri Sinha. I'm the Senior Rural Lead at Washington County, and I'm looking forward to today's discussion because these topics, we struggle with these all the time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Maitri. And Megan. Is Megan from Umatilla with us today? No. Okay. And Mike McCarty.
It's good to hear your real voice now. I'm Mike McCarthy, representing McCarthy Family Farm, and also an organization that we have reformed that was originally founded by Hector McPherson, Ag for Oregon.
All right. Thank you, Mike. And Mickey Killingsworth.
Mickey Killingsworth, farmer in Central Oregon. Gordon and Hillary are doing fine, and it's cold and windy here, so it's a good time to have the meeting. And some of the topics we're going to discuss today, I would like to hear other people's opinions because I have some real concerns on them.
All right, thank you, Mickey. I think it will be an interesting conversation. Nellie, I don't think was with us this morning either.
I am.
Oh, you are. Good morning.
Nellie McAdams with Oregon Agricultural Trust. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
All right. Thank you. Well, welcome and thank you for joining us. And we also have Oliver as an alternate for wine growers this morning. Oliver?
Yeah, this is Olivier Jamin,
Olivier,
representing Oregon Wine Grower Association, environmental and land use attorney.
All right, thank you. It's nice to have you with us today. And Rory.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Rory Isbell. I'm a staff attorney with Central Oregon Land Watch. Similarly, looking forward to today's discussion. I think the topics will lend to some really interesting perspectives, farm income, private parks. And then finally, I'm also hoping for this meeting to get an update on Mickey's lambs that were born.
That is very important. I think everybody is curious to know how Gordon and Hillary are doing, Mickey.
They are doing fine. They are fat and sassy. They have a good mom, 52 white, and you know, they're at this stage where they think they're teenagers because lambs at about 3 days are where babies are at 2, and they progress that fast. So you have to remember at 5 to 6 months, that's when they're mature and get to go out either into production or onto the dinner table.
I'm not sure how I feel about the latter, having one named after me. All right. And Samantha, we have you with us this morning.
Hi, Samantha Bear, representing the Oregon Property Owners Association. We represent private property owners around the state, including farmers, many of whom have farm stands, agritourism activities, etc. And today I am most interested in learning about kind of the genesis for some of these ideas and some of the conversation in the technical work group that led to some of this language.
Okay. And we will touch on that later in the conversation. All right. And for 1,000 Friends of Yamhill County, for Rob, Sid is participating today.
Sid Friedman, board member of Friends of Yamhill County, appearing as Rob Halliburton's alternate this morning. Looking forward to making progress on some of these issues and helping gain some clarity on what the proper rule language should be.
Great, thank you. And Tyler.
Morning all, Tyler Ernst. I'm General Counsel and Director of Regulatory Affairs for the Oregon Forest Industries Council. Mostly here to listen today. Look forward to the conversation.
All right, thank you. Thank you for being here, all of you. And unfortunately, Catherine and Jeff were not able to make the meeting today. So we will, they will be submitting comments, written comments in later that we'll share out before the next meeting with the next comment package. All right, so I'm going to share my screen really briefly. There we go. And again, apologies for the technical issues this morning. I really appreciate that we do have a great group here with us representing a variety of different perspectives. And, I'll say again that you are all selected to participate on this Rules Advisory Committee because we do want to hear from you and we want to hear your opinion. So we are also, and we have been encouraging members as well as the general public to submit written comments into the department. So if something occurs to you after the meeting or you didn't feel comfortable sharing something during the meeting, we do still want to hear from you. So please feel free to forward me your thoughts via email or schedule a call with Gordon or myself. We have received a lot of written feedback, which you have seen in the meeting packets and in the separate comment packets that we've emailed prior to the meeting. So there have been a lot of comments coming through. I think it might also be helpful to have like a single comment packet of all the comments received so far. We've had a couple of comments on that or questions about that. And so for the next comment packet, it will be aggregated with all the comments that have been received from the start of this rulemaking. So again, we do want to encourage this ongoing collection of feedback for the agency, and that includes anybody following along online, as well as RAC members. Go ahead and submit comments to us via email. I do want to reiterate that is our intention to carefully consider these conversations that we are having, as well as the comments that we are collecting as we work on developing and refining proposed rule language. We will be discussing the sort of final proposals at our July meeting, where we will have a discussion on the agency revisions to draft rule. And we'll get that out to you a couple weeks in advance of that meeting so you can review and comment on it before the July meeting, and there'll be a decisional discussion on that in July. So I also want to reiterate that while it's fantastic if we end up coming to an agreement about the language, we don't necessarily need to. We know that there are folks who would like the agency to do more with the language and folks who would like the agency to do less with the language. So we will definitely note alternative perspectives based on the comments and discussions in our report to LCDC that will go out before the September hearing. And all of you also have, the opportunity as a member of the public to participate in those LCDC hearings in the future, whether you want to support staff's recommendation or you'd rather see something else. So before we move into these discussions today, I wanted to revisit what our commission has asked us to do. So as most folks know, again, the charge was expanded at the April commission meeting. So the original charge, had asked us to codify identified case law standards with the intent of adopting rule language that would result in more consistent implementation of those case law standards, and that would provide additional clarity to counties, to rural residents, and potential applicants with the intent of reducing unnecessary appeals. So the whole focus of the original rulemaking is on clarifying, making things easier to implement. There's a similar theme with the expanded charge, where the intent behind the charge additions is noted as improving clarity and facilitating implementation of the standards by counties. So the topics that the commission asked us to consider were repairing the circular definition of processing, or preparation, adding a definition of processing. That will be the first item that we're going to discuss today. Establishing an evidentiary standard for the verification of income. That is something we'll also discuss later this afternoon. To identify a replicable methodology for alignment of a rectangle template test with a road or stream. We'll actually be talking about that at the June 11th meeting. So apologies for any confusion there. To clarify the sort of recreational use aspect of private parks that we're going to be discussing today. To also clarify whether uses listed in Chapter 215 of statute may or may not alternatively reviewed as home occupations or commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. And that I anticipate will be the bulk of our discussion at our next meeting. And the commission also asked us to discuss an approach to recommending updates to replacement dwelling rule language. So that is the expanded charge. And again, the focus behind that those charge additions, the expanded charge, is to reduce regulatory confusion and facilitate implementation. So that is the sort of underlying principle behind these discussions here. Okay. All right, so let's move right into the discussion on preparation and processing. So I've got essentially the charge for this particular item at the top here. The first part of the charge from the commission was to repair the circular definition of preparation at OAR 660-3320. again, to reduce regulatory confusion, improve clarity, and facilitate implementation. The second part of that charge is to add a definition of processing, focusing on the distinction between a preparation use and a processing use. So I'm going to suggest we focus on preparation first and then move into discussion of processing. But before we start talking about language, I wanted to go over, really quickly the various levels, if you will, of preparation and processing. So preparation is a part of the definition of farm use at 215-203. It is the normal sort of on-farm cleaning, treatment, sorting, packaging that goes along with preparing farm products for market. Because that activity, preparation, is considered a farm use, DLCD does not report on or collect information on preparation-related permits. So say, there's a permit for a new on-farm pack shed. That is not the sort of thing that a county would report to DLCD for reporting to the legislature. We don't collect data on that. So when something goes beyond preparation, it will likely move into a processing category. So the second sort of tier of opportunity, if you will, is processing under 215-255, which is a sub 1 use, right? So a use that's allowed, subject to the standards established by the legislature. Counties have to offer them. Counties cannot be more restrictive. So in order to be considered a processing facility permitted as a sub 1 use under 215-255, a quarter of the crops need to be produced on the farm operation containing the processing facility. The square footage devoted to processing is limited to 10,000 square feet, and processing is limited to processing of crops, poultry, and rabbits. So we do, as an agency, collect permitting data on 215-255 processing permits. And in the past 15 years, actually the past 10 years really, the majority of processing permits issued under 215-255 have been for CBD extracts. And the majority of those issued in Jackson County. So I'm really curious to hear from Charles about this topic. So somebody had asked me about alcohol-related processing facilities under 255 in the state, and really there have only been 3 issued. 1 cidery, 1 distillery, and 1 winery. After CBD extracts, most processing permits are for some other form of crop processing. So when processing facilities don't meet the standards in 215-255, not all of the crops are, very few of the crops are produced on site, or it's a standalone processing facility, or say the square footage exceeds 10,000 square feet of floor space, then those are reviewed as sub 2 uses subject to the farm impacts test as a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use. So those are sort of the 3 categories of processing. So preparation is a farm use, processing is a sub 1 use, or a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use as a sub 2 use, subject to the farm impacts test. All right. So going back to preparation, which is the farm use, as it exists now, the rule definition of preparation is somewhat circular, and it has been on the agency staff list for over a decade to address. So the definition currently reads, preparation of products or byproducts includes but is not limited to cleaning, treatment, sorting, or packaging of the products or byproducts. Not a whole lot wrong there. And products or byproducts raised on such land means that those products or byproducts are raised on the farm operation where the preparation occurs, or on other farmland, provided the preparation is occurring only on land being used for the primary purpose of obtaining a profit and money from the farm use of the land. So when you remember that preparation is actually part of the definition of farm use, this essentially reads that preparation can occur where preparation is occurring. And it's ultimately a circular definition. So actually under that latter interpretation of this definition, we've seen several large-scale commercial standalone cleaning, sorting, packing facilities approved as farm uses on land where no farming operation actually exists. And while these types of facilities are really important to the farm economy, and we do want to support their development, the thought is that these types of large-scale cleaning, sorting, packing facilities, when they're not associated with a farm operation, shouldn't straightforward be considered a farm use, and they should be reviewed subject to standards as CACFUs, or commercial activities in conjunction with farm uses. Lauren, you had a question?
Yeah, so in those instances where there isn't products being raised, but the processing is happening, are the products being raised on other parcels of land owned by the same operator? They just aren't adjacent pieces of property?
So in the instances that have come to the department's attention, they have been sort of aggregators of product from the state of Oregon, some from the local area, some from larger areas in the state, and reviewed as farm use, essentially. So again, those decisions aren't reported to us, and they aren't reviewed for potential conflicts with surrounding farm operations.
No, but I'm asking, so the person that owns the processing facility, they also own another parcel that's providing the product.
So let me be clear that these are for preparation, not processing.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. Sorry, preparation. So
Yeah.
so they're getting that. So what I'm asking is the farmer that's preparing on one parcel getting the product from another parcel that's theirs?
No. So a farm operation would be considered, multiple tracts under the same ownership. Yeah, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about somebody who's not growing the produce or meat that is being processed or prepared at the facility, sorry. So again, preparation is different than processing, and there's a fine line between those definitions, right? Preparation is, intended to be a normal part of a farm operation, normal part of farm use, and therefore it's considered a farm use in 215-203. Samantha, you had a question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a question necessarily. I think I have comments. I think this does not seem like a technical clarification. This seems like a policy decision. And I don't see how this is circular by how it's being described. What I think this is getting at is there is an opinion that packing houses should not be considered a farm use. And there are many circumstances where farmers have their packing houses or their storage facilities on a parcel that is not the same parcel where they're growing the commodity, and they may do packing, sorting, or storage for other producers in the area. So what it sounds like is this is an effort to remove those types of operations from the definition of farm use. And I'm not sure that's a technical clarification. And I also want to flag that I'm not sure we should begin this conversation without having a conversation about the possible tax implications from changing around these definitions.
Thank you. And so, Sam, I think you're probably referring to the 1996 report to the governor that was included in the package, and that was included to, provide a little bit of background information about how this topic has historically been reviewed. Since that was issued, the Department of the program has been separated. So, like the tax regulations have been moved to Chapter 308 of statute. So the Department of Revenue's regulations have been moved out of Chapter 215. So just to be clear,
the definition of 215-203, the stat doesn't have any parlay into tax law at all now?
Correct. Department of Revenue relies on the definitions that are in Chapter 308 of statute. And Jim was part of that transition, if you want to say more about that history, Jim.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that was something, gosh, it's been 20 years ago or so now, that Don Schellenberg and I were on a work group, rule advisory committee with Department of Revenue, and through that process, we separated tax law from zoning law so that the two are now two separate areas. And so any definitional change in land use law would not impact definitional changes in property tax law.
Okay, can you send the rule over, Jim, that in DOR's rules that shows that?
It's not a rule, it's actually statute. The legislature made the
Mhm.
change, so.
Yeah.
Okay, could you send that over?
Yeah,
Could someone send that over? Okay,
Sure.
thank you.
Yeah, it's chapter 308 of statute, where you'll find the Department of Revenue's definition of farm use. Yeah.
I mean, either way, tax aside, I don't think this is a technical clarification. And I think that it appears from what I'm hearing that this is an effort to remove packing houses from the definition of farm use.
So I want to be clear that when preparation is occurring on a farm operation, now even if it's on a different parcel within the farm operation, like the intent is that's farm use. That's our understanding of the original intent behind it. And I think there was an intent that some level of packing for other farms may also cleaning, sorting, packing, treatment may also happen on that farm for other farms in the area. So the question is, at what point in time does it become a standalone, packing facility that is not associated with a farm operation, right? But instead is a standalone commercial use, essentially, that is providing that preparation service to farms in the state of Oregon or some other regional area. And, should it be appropriately considered farm use at that point? I think Mike had his hand up, then Olivier, and then Maitri. So Mike?
Hillary, correct me or if I misunderstand this, but as an example, in Hood River County, we have a lot of packing houses, family packing houses pack 50-75% of their own fruit and then also pack for other people. So that's one scenario we have. The other scenario we have is we have two large packing houses. One is grower co-op. They pack on industrial land and don't pack any of their own fruit. So those would be cases that we're talking about here that both work. Is that correct?
So in this particular case, like a family packing operation, that's associated with the farm operation and they're packing for other growers in the area as well, that would be considered preparation. That would be considered a farm use. So if you have a standalone co-op that, is not associated with an individual farm operation, that would be considered a commercial use, or most likely a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use under the program. Mike, would you maybe share a little bit about sort of like packing or preparation packing on your operation, and if you have any processing facilities that you also use?
Well, right. We do very little packing on our own operation. We're not that big. All of our fruit goes to a major packing house. Actually, some of it goes to a small packing house too. That's a good example. All of our pears go to a huge packing house in Odell that's on industrial land. They don't own any or pack any of their own fruit. Our cherries actually go to a small packer who packs 50 to probably 75% of his own fruit and also packs our cherries, and his packing house is on farmland.
Right. Thank you. Olivier?
Thanks, Hilary. And I appreciate the discussion on packing house and maybe what those definitions are trying to accomplish, but I don't think that's the only thing that the proposed language would result in. If I'm looking at the the proposed definitions here, and particularly dealing the language are on other farmland, and limiting, the products and byproducts that can be prepared to products that are on the farm operation where the preparation occurs. So it seems to be intended to limit it to whatever is grown on the property that the preparation is happening. And to us, that really raised some pretty big equity concerns, where that definition would really favor large industrial farmers that have the capacity to own, enough land to raise the crops that they want to prepare on site, whereas keeping the opportunity to have crops coming from other farmland, whether it's owned by the farmer or leased, because not everyone has a chance to own all the land that they're getting crops from, allows smaller farmers to participate in those programs and to also have some preparation of those products. So I think one of the big concerns that we have when we read the proposed definition is that it's really disadvantageous for smaller farmers, for maybe farmers in BIPOC community that tend to have smaller farms as well, and really favor large farms and industrial farms. And so that was a pretty big flag when seeing that proposed deletion and definitions.
Yeah. And Olivier, are you talking about the first option there, or the second option?
Both options propose to delete on other farmland, right? The second one has a little bit of a caveat with the 1/4 of those products, being raised on the farm operation. But that could be extended to say, raised on the farm operation, the preparation occurs, or other land that the farmer owns or leases or gets product from, enter long-term grower agreements or things like that. I think, that second definition is not as, doesn't get rid of that option altogether, but still restricts smaller farmers quite a bit more than what we currently have.
So for the second definition, is it that you would prefer to see language in there clarifying that those 3/4 could come from other operations, like in the local agricultural area or the state of Oregon, or how would you propose?
Yeah, I think they would need, and we can submit comments, written comments on that. I think we need to vet exactly proposed language. We've got added to the RAC recently, so we haven't had a chance to dive into everything in detail yet. And we're working on preparing written comments, but what we've had time to do is reviewing what's being proposed right now and kind of flag what came out as problematic definitions.
So again, with the second definition, which provides more leeway for having at least 3/4 of the crops processed, produced by other farms, maybe it could be more clear that that's the intent there. Is essentially what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, that might be one way to do it. Again, I think we'll submit written comments on that point to propose language that would accomplish that.
Okay, thank you. So we have Maitri, and then Sam, then Rory, then Sid.
Thank you. So this is really interesting. I think one thing that would help is to have the definition of farm operation clarified, where we kind of understand that it's the same farmer or the same farm entity, that it's the subject farm and also properties that are either leased or owned by the same farm. Then they can bring all their products to that one site. They don't necessarily have to have a building everywhere to process it. And I also feel that what we're calling preparation is essentially something that can be done in an ag building, which is requires very minimal permitting process. So it should primarily be the intent to support it for the farm operation rather than opening it up to other farmers, because we've had inquiries like that. The general response we give people is the second definition that's being proposed here is more in line with what a processing facility allows, where you have only 1/4 and most of it from outside. But I think for farm operations, where we're allowing them to prepare their own, prepare on site without requiring any permitting, it should be more to support the farm operation itself, because when you're opening it up to more from other farmers, then it kind of brings in an aspect of land use review for about the traffic or the buildings or the number of people employed and all of the other development standards, excuse me, that apply. So that's kind of my thought there. And I also thought maybe in the definition for preparation, drying might be included. I see that it's in the processing, but not in the preparation. But oftentimes people dry their products and just package it, maybe say mushrooms or things like that. So I I would kind of support that.
All right, thank you, Maitri. And so again, to clarify, when we're talking about preparation, we're talking about something that's allowed as a farm use. It's, not part of the reporting to the state or to the legislature, and there's very minimal review that goes into it. I would imagine that most of this, if there's a building associated with it, new building, it would be an ag building, which is also exempt from structural review. So folks are aware that's what we're talking about here, as opposed to going the sub 1 processing use route or the commercial activity in conjunction with route. All right, so then we had Sam, Rory, Sid, and Jim.
I just wanted to provide additional, oh, sorry, am I this?
Yes,
I know
you are.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay. You're good. So I wanted to also provide comments on the second option too, where we talk about being outdoors. I mean, there's case law out there that talks about the legislative intent of the statute and what preparation is. And it makes clear in those cases that the legislature intended for preparation to be able to occur indoors. And that's also just rooted in reality, because if they're not happening indoors, the produce is going to likely rot and not be able to be preserved in the way that needs to. So I don't understand the inclusion of outdoors. And I don't understand why there's a need to only have this occur in small buildings. I think it goes back to there's just a desire to remove larger packing houses or buildings from the used for farm use from the definition of farm use. Again, I don't see why we would do that. And I don't think that's a technical clarification. I think that's a policy choice.
All right, thank you. And so just to paraphrase, you would essentially not add the red language into sub A in the second option if I were to.
I'm not supporting either of these options. I don't think either of these options are technical clarifications, and I haven't seen anything that shows that, and I haven't seen anything that would warrant why we would do this, especially given that it would have a negative impact on farmers.
All right, thank you, Sam. And Rory?
Yeah, thanks. So I think some of the discussion about impacts on pack houses and small producers, we might be forgetting what the statutory definition of farm use already says, that already has the language that preparation and storage of farm products or byproducts raised on such land. So already in statute, the policy decision that, of course, we have no control over here. It's required that in order to, have a preparation facility, farm products have to be raised on the same land. So I think the second option that proposes that at least 1/4 of those products, it's a pretty liberal balance of interpreting that statute. It allows only 1/4 of the farm products to go through that facility to be raised on such land. I think it would be just as fair an interpretation to say that all of the products need to be raised on such land. That could be, even more direct implementation of the policy that's already in statute.
So Rory, if I were to paraphrase, I'm hearing you say that our interpretation is actually a little bit more liberal than what you think the statutory language has said here.
Yeah,
for
I mean,
that second option. Yeah.
The statute doesn't say what percentage of farm products. So, I think that the second option is certainly, there's no conflict. And I would like to think it would go a long way towards addressing some of the valid concerns about impacts on farmers who do rely on that preparation facility as part of their income stream. You know, that's fair, and we want to support those producers that are growing the crop on their land and also doing preparation activities on their land. So I think that the balance in the second option there kind of accomplishes both of the concerns that I'm hearing from folks today.
Okay. Thank you, Rory.
I just want to flag for the record that that does not address my concerns. I respectfully, Rory, I just disagree with that.
Okay, thank you.
Because if you, right now, the rule expressly says it can be stuff from off farm or off site. It's, and if you delete that language, I don't see how the other language in the statute kind of balances that out.
All right, so we have Sid, and then Jim Johnson, then Olivier, and then Justin, and then Mickey. So Sid?
Yeah, first let me thank you, Hillary, for your clear presentation regarding the various levels of preparation, processing, manufacturing, et cetera. I want to endorse the comments of Maitri and Rory. I think Olivier, I disagree with you a little bit. I think these definitions actually tend to support small producers, and by limiting larger operations that are primarily geared to other farm operations rather than the subject farm operation. Between these two definitions, this is not policy, but simply I believe the first definition is easier to administer for county planners, although I would defer to county planners because it's a clear and objective standard that doesn't require verification of where crops are coming from or et cetera. That said, by requiring a minority of the crops to actually come from the farm operation, 25%, that seems like a small bar to clear to ensure that the subject, that the preparation really is tied to the farm use on the larger farm operation, whether that's just the subject parcel or a larger farm operation with many different tracts.
All right, thank you, Sid. And Jim?
Thanks. I wanted to give a little background or like I worked on the definition of preparation originally through the Rule Advisory Committee for LCDC years back. Ron Eber and I were the primary drafters of some of this. But to back up a little bit, in my work, most of the questions I get or the situations that I've been involved in involving preparation have revolved around definition. What is preparation versus what is processing? And some of the conflicts that I've had where I've disagreed with some local interpretations has been where someone is interpreting what is going on, in my opinion, as preparation, is trying to argue that it's processing, and thus take it out of the sub 1 category or the farm use category and make it subject to conditional use standards. And so it's very, very important, in my opinion, based on my experience over time, that when we're talking about preparation, that there be a definite definition here and that it's very clear. I don't think defining terms as policy. I think defining terms as clarification, and that was a very strong element that the Technical Review Committee brought up throughout our entire discussion, not just about preparation, but about lots of items. Definition is a key problem in many of the issues that were discussed by the Technical Review Committee. In terms of products on the same land, when the LCDC originally defined preparation, the issue that came up was related to grass seed cleaners initially. And what we learned through that process, and for those of us that work in agriculture, most of the grass seed industry, a lot of farmers have cleaners on their own property, but in order to have the capital to install those cleaners and run those cleaners, they need to be cleaning other farmers' products also to establish that use. And so LCDC, recognizing that, that's where they came up with percentages. You know, you've got to, you can't just have a standalone grass seed cleaner. That's a commercial use in conjunction with farm use that's providing a service. But that if you're cleaning your own product, you also need to be able to clean someone else's product to, in effect, be able to afford to establish that use. And so that's where that came from originally. I'd have to do some thinking on this, but seriously, cleaning somebody's preparation involving on-site farm use is important, but also there needs to be a reality in terms of also doing other farmers' products as long as there's farm use on the property. So that's kind of my background to this.
Thank you, Jim. I think that's very helpful to understand some of the conversation that sort of underlaid the history behind the rule that expanded upon the statutory definition of, raised on that land to include, other farms in order to support the viability of like an on-farm preparation operation. All right, Olivier, and then Justin, Mickey, and then Blair.
Thanks, Hillary. I think to get back to kind of our conversation on the second proposed definition, I think one of the issues we have there is that we're trying to include restriction and standard and criteria in definitions of terms. And so, those issues of how big floor area devoted to preparation should be, or how much of byproduct should be coming from the land on which the preparation occurs, those should be part of standards applying to specific uses as opposed to definitions section. We're trying to establish some context around uses. And so I think that's where we're not really comfortable with the proposed definition and the second option as well. I think, to go back to Rory's comment regarding small versus large farms, we've talked to our members, and I think the concern that I expressed regarding the changes favoring large landowners versus industrial farmers versus small landowners, it's not something we're seeing only in this definition. I think it's something we're seeing in the proposed changes and construction activities in connection with farming. Is something we're seeing with the insistence of land owned in the definition of processing that we'll discuss later down the road. So we're seeing with the proposed changes a trend that in our opinion is the end result is going to hurt small farmers, and for us, small vineyards. And so I think the trend is pretty clear when we're reviewing all the proposed changes and in broad context. We can argue about whether the definition of farm use and talking about such land in 215, 203 really means what, that the product should be coming from that land. I don't see that in the statute personally. So I think that's an issue of statutory interpretation. So I don't agree with that. But that I wanted to give a little more context about why we're not comfortable with the second definition and kind of reemphasize what we see as the impact of those proposed changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. So again, there is something about this wording that you feel is more restrictive for small farmers than large ones, by clarifying that that a portion of the crops produced on that farm have to be part of the preparation. Is that right? And that, that allowing a small farm to import other products to be processed, or
I think the main issue on the second definition, I think, is that we're importing standards and restrictions into a definition section rather than trying to talk about those in standards and criteria applying to use. And so we're kind of mixing when you're looking at, code interpretation and what you're looking at when you're applying for a permit and looking at different uses, there are standards and criteria that apply to uses. Those are not in definition section. And so what we're doing here is restricting at the outset what qualifies as a preparation of products and byproducts, rather than focusing on what a use on DFU land or forest land should be later down the road by imposing criteria or standards. So we're just creating those roadblocks early on in the definition section, and then are going to apply to an entire section as opposed to looking at specific uses.
Yeah, so in this case, the use itself, preparation is farm use, which is not necessarily subject to standards outside the definition in 215-203. So that's an interesting conundrum. All right, so thank you. So I think we had Justin and then Mickey and then Blair and then Mike.
Great, thank you. And please kind of take my suggestion with perhaps with a grain of salt. But I believe I'm on this committee kind of as to provide a bit more of an outsider perspective, having worked with these issues more on the ancillary, with more of the environmental side. I used to run the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act programs in Florida, then Clean Water Act in Oregon, and but this wasn't my day to day. And I know that putting together these RAC meetings are very time intensive and everyone's time is very delicate, but perhaps having a bit of a conversation about, and I know these in the materials, but having just a very brief overview of the background of the language, the case law that the agency feels requires a change, maybe discussing that before we get into the weeds would be helpful, because I think that helps, just having people in the room all hearing the same kind of thing. I know that can be a can of worms at the same time, but kind of hearing that background can help eliminate that kind of policy versus technical change, gray area, which those lines can obviously blur, and we know where we need to stand. But like having a little bit of an overview of what the case said and what the background was that requires this kind of change would be helpful, because we're inherently we should be implementing policy and making technical changes that that courts have said are required to meet the intent of that statutory policy. And it's this is a really tricky area, I mean, as we all know, where the goal is to protect farm uses, and we don't want to restrict operations on farms because that could prevent a farm from from operating and being successful and thriving.
Right.
But at the same time, there's sacrifices that need to be made to have that protection of farmland. And thinking about to talk specifically about this language, I hate bureaucratic bright lines, like 1/4 or 25%. Those things are tough, but at the same time, those things are helpful. Those sometimes you just need those to say, okay, here is the line, because then it's just judgment calls. And as the planners on this call know, that can get very tricky, and people feel like you're making a judgment call, and that's impacting their lives and their operations. So, I tend to, as much as I don't like bureaucratic, and then, in quotes, bureaucratic bright lines, sometimes a 25% threshold or something like that is necessary just to have a clear sidebar. So thank you for listening to that.
All right, thank you, Justin. And I'm hearing that more background information or background document would be helpful. All right, we have Mickey, Blair, Mike, and then Lauren. So Mickey.
I want outdoor put in there and kept in there, because this is not about packing sheds. This is about all of agriculture. And obviously, if you've ever drove up during wheat country, they do a lot of storage outdoors until they're ready to ship. That's one example. Other examples are when hay is coming in to be shipped. It is, if it doesn't have to be inside a shed, in other areas that don't get rain, it will be stored outside. So it is key to remember, this is not about packing sheds. This is about all of agriculture, and different commodities have different requirements, and you need to keep the outdoor part in there.
All right, thank you, Mikey. Blair.
Yeah. Hey, so I understand what you're trying to do, and clear and objective standards are helpful. I think, as Justin was talking about, we've seen in the farm stand criteria that the 25% rule is pretty much unenforceable. I mean, to keep the data and to understand where things are coming from. So I'd love to find another way, because it hasn't really worked very well in that criteria. Secondly, a number of members have expressed an allergy to policymaking. And LCDC has full authority to make policy regulating agricultural land. So there's no prohibition against doing that. It's set up in ORS Chapter 197, very clear, happened in 1975. So if some of this is policymaking, that's well within LCDC's authority. The first part of our charge was codifying case law. We're now beyond that. There's 5 other items that are not codifying case law. So we're not codifying case law anymore. We're talking about improving criteria. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Blair. Mike McCarthy and then Lauren.
Yeah, Hillary, I like most of these changes. I don't see any real problem with it. I don't think it's going to be a real harmful to small growers or large growers. And I gave the example of a cherry packing house where it's a relatively small grower, and I'm sure he's right in maybe 25, 30, 40% area, and is able to support his operation by packing a lot of other people's cherries. The one question I do have for you, though, is if someone doesn't fit in these particular categories, they still have the option of doing a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use application, do they not?
Yeah, so if somebody didn't fit under the definition of preparation, they could also look at obtaining a permit under 215, 255 for processing, or as a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use, which is sub 2. So farm use, preparation, that is use allowed outright. And as we've heard, there's very little review that happens at the county level for that. If any, typically only if there's a new building being proposed, would there be review by the county at all for preparation use. For a processing use, that requires a review by the county, but it's a sub 1 review. So they need to apply the standards established by the legislature. They can't be more restrictive. And then there's a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use, which is a very broad category subject to the farm impacts test. So there are other options. If, for example, somebody wanted to operate a preparation facility that also did a little bit of processing, or if somebody wanted to operate a preparation facility as a sort of standalone facility that was not part of a underlying farm operation, or to process only some very small amount of crops that were produced on the underlying farm operation.
So Hillary, just to clarify, for folks who might not be as familiar with this as others who might be listening or listening later, if either of these definitions were adopted and a use no longer, would fall into this category, and it was still going to be allowed on EFU land, they would have to go through a permitting process to have that be allowed. That could potentially be a conditional use process that would be subject to the farm impacts test. Can you walk through what that application would have to look like for folks?
Sure. If it was a existing use, it would likely be a legally established non-conforming use. Then non-conforming by the rule change, and no action would be required. For new uses,
what limitations would that potentially have?
What do you mean?
If you become a non-conforming use, what potential limitations could that come with?
So if you want to expand or replace that use, there are different sort of standards that need to be reviewed. And those are established in Chapter 215. I
And then
don't
if it's a
have them
new
at the top of
use,
my head. If it's a new use, it would simply be subject to this. So if it's preparation, right? It's a farm use. Again, farm use, there's very little review by the county unless there's a new structure proposed. And typically that would be for an ag building, which is exempt from structural standards. So if, somebody had an operation, a farm operation, and, they are producing basil and, they are, cleaning it, packaging it, whatever that they're doing, storing it, and getting it ready to ship out, or maybe that's a bad example. Whatever it is that they're preparing, they could also prepare product from other farms. In Oregon, essentially, as long as a quarter of that product was produced on site. So again, if there's no new structure proposed, this is just part of farm use, it's allowable. If there's a new structure, then that would require the sort of normal like site plan and building sign off, which in this case is not that much because they're exempt from structural review, but still subject to like mechanical and electrical and plumbing review. If somebody is proposing something that doesn't meet the definition of preparation, say they aren't operating a farm, right? Or they want to prepare more than 20 more, they want like 90% of what they are preparing to come from offsite, then that would require a conditional use review, most likely for a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use. Right.
and can you walk through what that application is like with the farm impacts test?
So it's going to vary from county to county because most counties also have other standards that they apply, right? And almost all counties apply the commercial activity in conjunction with farm use, but some of them have different standards applied to it. About a third of the counties in the state apply the language that we've been previously discussing from case law. Many other counties in the state actually have a list of uses based on the original sort of legislative conversation from 1973. So they have a list, many counties have this list of the types of uses that qualify as commercial activities in conjunction with farm use, right? So beyond that, then there's the farm impacts test. And for a farm impacts test, you, under the guidance that provided by the Stop the Dump, you need to essentially provide evidence that your proposed preparation operation is not going to significantly impact farm operations in the surrounding area or forest operations in the surrounding area or the cost of conducting those farm or forest practices. And what Stop the Dump says is that you need to identify the farm operations in the surrounding area and the forest operations in the surrounding area. You need to describe the practices that are occurring on those operations. And then once you've described, what's occurring around you, you need to identify potential impacts to those practices. And once you've done that, then there's a determination that there's not going to be a significant impact to those practices, right, in order to provide findings that that test is met.
And are those types of uses subject to a public hearing or public comment or
Yes.
often appealed?
So type 2 uses are subject to public notice so that the surrounding farm operations know about them and they can provide feedback on whether or not they feel they'll be harmed by that type of a use. So sometimes some people call it the good neighbor test, right? So that is publicly noticed so that the farm operators know that that's going on. And then they can provide opinion of how they fear they might be hurt by that. And through a public review process, if there are impacts that are identified, they can be mitigated as well through conditions of approval if there are for many types of potential impacts.
Thanks. I just wanted that on the record, and I hope that's reflected in the notes because I think it's important for folks outside of the RAC to understand that what we're talking about is a pretty big regulatory shift if we remove uses that have been historically considered a farm use out of that definition.
And so to clarify, this is really intended as a clarification of something like a standalone pack facility that's not associated with a farm operation is not in this farm use category, that it's, you know, not part of a farm operation, that it's really a standalone commercial activity. All right,
And
so
I'll
we'll go.
appreciate seeing any cases that just say that that type of clarification is warranted.
Okay. So we'll go to Mike and then Lauren and then Jim. So, Mike, did you have your hand up?
I do not have my hand up.
I lost track. Sorry.
No problem. Thanks.
Thanks. So Lauren and then Jim Johnson.
Yeah, so I would say that, well, one, if we're going to have a policy conversation here about things like preparation, I'm concerned that we don't have, for example, the #1 ag industry in the state that participates probably in preparation. We don't have nurseries here to talk about how this would affect their industry. And so I don't know, looking at this language, I can't weigh whether or not this would have an impact on them. Farm Bureau supports preparation for farm use, and I don't know if this language specifically would affect that. And so I can't weigh how, I mean, I'm hearing both sides of it from everybody. And so I just want to be able to adequately weigh that by hearing all the voices at the table and the industries at the table. So I want to make sure that and we don't have grass seeds. So we don't have any seed cleaners here to talk about how this will impact them. And so that's my issue. So originally we started with the charge of we're not having a policy conversation, we're just codifying case law. Now we're having a policy conversation that could affect industries. And as a person here that represents general ag, I want to make sure I'm adequately representing them the best I can while being the person in the middle trying to do that. It's difficult not knowing and hearing lots of voices about how it will impact or won't impact. And so I want to make sure that I'm doing that adequately. And this language, as it's proposed, like I said, we're hearing a lot of opinions on that. And I don't know, I couldn't say right now with any sort of confidence that it will or will not impact in a positive or negative way. So I think knowing more and would be helpful. And also on the second one, I guess I also have concerns about the exceed X square feet and at least a quarter, because when you're talking about operations of all shapes and sizes, if you set a square foot size, but a quarter of their product could be very large, they may not fall into that. So you could get a catch-22 there. So I don't know how that would work if you've got someone who is processing a lot of their product and they're a large scale operation, but they're limited to square feet. So I don't know how you meet both of those needs.
Right. And so so again, this would be preparation and not processing. And
yeah, I mean, but like, yeah, I'm
square
sorry.
footage. Okay. So again,
but potting, right? So nursery, they're prepping, they're putting it in a pot.
Okay.
I mean,
and again, on your point, we encourage, you know, collection of comments from a variety of different sources. You know, it's difficult to have a conversation like this with, you know, too many folks in the room, but we are definitely encouraging folks who are curious or interested or feel like they may be impacted by this to submit comments to the agency so we can consider those opinions and those positions. All right, Jim and then Mike.
Yeah, a couple of things. First, in terms of preparation, Hillary, you keep talking about how you know, as a farm use, there's no criteria or anything here. And actually, the definition of farm use has some discretion built into it. And there are cases out there in LUBA and even in the Court of Appeals where it's been determined that when a county makes a decision whether something is or is not farm use, that can be a land use decision. And I've had most of the issues in my experience over the years as it relates to the term preparation within the definition of farm use has been related to definition. What is preparation? In fact, where I've had some disagreements with local governments is where I've been arguing on behalf of a farmer that something is preparation and a local government wants to call it processing and thus take it through a different process. So what I'm getting at is I think it's really important that that preparation be defined so that if you want these to be considered farm use and not go through some of this process, that there's not the less discretion there is, the less chance this will be considered a land use decision and be just be allowed outright as you've been discussing. But currently, in my experience, the term preparation has a lot of discretion involved in it and thus could be considered a land use decision and could be appealable, regardless if it's falls within the definition of farm use. I've seen irrigation practices be determined by a court to be discretionary interpretation, and thus whether or not it's farm use or not could be appealed. So this is something that the more definitive we can be, the better off it will be for agriculture in terms of that process. I also would just like to point out that when you look at the definition of farm use, it talks about use of on the subject land. So preparation is part of that definition of farm use. It has to be related to use on the land. It can't be standing alone and not have any relationship to that use on the land. So that's what I've got for now.
All right, thank you, Jim. And sorry, I didn't mean to imply that there couldn't be a land use decision associated with an interpretation of farm use. In presentations, hope to say that, but in practice, like typically, what triggers that conversation at the counter is a request for something else, like a new building, or something along those lines, and the stands are often pretty low unless there is a big question as to whether or not that's actually farm use. So you're right. Thanks for.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that, Hillary, but where this has been, this has been controversial or where it's gotten involved is where a farmer has considered what they're doing to be preparation and just not went in and got any permits or whatever. And then there's been enforcement action or complaints or the like. And then there's had to be a determination whether or not it's, preparation farm use. And so that's where the importance comes into play. It's usually related to some kind of enforcement action.
And in this case, what I'm hearing you say, Jim, is that having the solid definition actually helps protect farmers from those types of enforcement actions or interpretations by county that what they're doing actually isn't preparation.
Yeah, it provides certainty. It really provides the certainty that's required.
All right, then we have Mike and then Sid and then Mitri.
Sorry, can I quickly ask Jim a clarifying question before we move on? Jim, it just on his point he just made. I just have a question.
Sure.
Jim, on the cases that you're talking about, was the confusion based on the size of the building or whether it was taking place indoors or outdoors, or whether it was because they were doing, packing, sorting, or cleaning other people's commodities, or was it because they were in, can you give us some more understanding there?
Well, it was nothing to do with size or anything like that. In the cases that I'm thinking of, it was a couple things. Number one, the county just was adamant that it was processing, not preparation. And so what's the difference between preparation and processing? And second, it related to offsite impacts and really the desire to review that use for impacts in a lot of cases, non-farm uses. In one case, it was rural residential development didn't like the idea of it. And so they wanted to apply the farm impacts test and they wanted to apply their conditional use standards for compatibility. And so it was really an interpretation of what is or is not. It had nothing to do with size, nothing to do with it. It was all about compatibility and just what is or is not. Is it processing or is it preparation?
All right, thank you. So Mike, then Sid, then Matry.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment in our Ag for Oregon group, we do have seed growers, one who does seed cleaning. I don't see that it's in any way would his operation would not be compliant with this. We also have some nurserymen. I do not see in any way that this would impede their operations at all. And the other thing about the impact test, if you're a farmer and you're going to go another route on this and you need to do the impacts test. I can do an impact test on my farm for something in about an hour because I know all the people around me, I know all their practices, and it's not a very complicated process if you actually farm in a particular area. So if you need to go that route, I don't see it as a big hurdle.
Thank you, Mike. All right, Sid, Matri, and then Jim.
So, I have a question for Jim that is similar to Samantha's. Jim, it sounds like you are saying, well, I guess I'll just put it this way. Jim, do you see problems in the current definition, cleaning, treatment, sorting, or packaging of products or byproducts? Do you think that definition needs further clarification in order to avoid the kind of controversy or problems that you've run into over the course of the years?
No.
Okay.
I have actually not had any issues with this. More so, it's been more just discussing with parties involved what really is processing versus what is preparation. I mean, processing, to me, the important thing here is going to be to define what processing is more than what preparation is. So my experience has been more just a desire not to call something preparation for other reasons.
Okay. Matri and then Olivier.
Yeah, so then circling back to the fact that it's the farm use, and given that it's exempt, and the intent is to make it easier for the farmers to prepare their own products that way, it should be at a scale that's appropriate for that. And then if the products from different farms are to be allowed, maybe some restrictions like we have for farm stands, say where there are regulations on how far the products can come from, or maybe exercise a bigger limit on the percent which different farm operations can contribute to a preparation facility on a completely different farm operation.
Thank you, Matri. So as a sort of additional or alternative standard for preparation in order to address scale, you would propose something like is in farm stands, which requires products sold be limited to those produced in the local agricultural area, which is defined as the state of Oregon and adjacent counties in other states. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Olivier?
Thanks, Larry. Just one quick thought on the definition of farm use again that was mentioned in 215-203. You know, we have the two ways. Says farm use means the current employment of land, and then says includes the preparation, storage, and disposal by marketing or otherwise of the products or byproducts raised on such land. It seems like a couple of people are relying on that to say that the definition of self and farm use limits to the land on which the byproducts or products are raised, which I'm just not reading this to say that. We could read this to say such land that's used for farm use. It's not limited to a specific tract of land that the products are coming from. So I just don't agree with that statutory interpretation here. And then just one quick comment, because a couple of people have mentioned that if you don't go this path of preparation, if you don't qualify for preparation, you could go through the CAFU process of commercial activity in connection with farm use. And just because we were not invited to the RAC when that conversation took place, there's been a lot of talk about how that, was codifying case law. And I think we disagree with the test that was proposed as part of CAFU also restricts, what can take place on EFU lines. I just wanted to mention that what we think is happening with the test that is proposed for CAFU is adopting one LUBAC case that is inconsistent with Supreme Court precedent. And that's how we read the case on CAFU as opposed to the test here looking at so-called codifying case law. We disagree with that statement. And since we weren't involved in that conversation earlier, I just wanted to put that in a record. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we would like to understand that concern better. And, we would very much like to have a conversation with wine growers or have comments, written comments on that particular concern.
We'll prepare pretty detailed written comments looking at that case law analysis.
All right. Thank you, Olivier.
I just want for the record
Can I just have for the record that we agree with Olivier's comments, particularly the first part about the interpretation of on such land? I think that means on farmland, and that's why DLCD's definition as it currently exists reads the way it does, where it says it can be from other properties as long as it's on farmland. And that by striking that, you're making a pretty significant change in that interpretation. So that could just be added into the notes, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I think as, Jim was saying earlier, the language that is in there was added, in an effort to recognize that, particularly smaller operations find it profitable to make the investment for the preparation equipment when they're also preparing for other firms in the area. And, the question is, when is it, when it's not associated with a farm operation, should it be approved through a different pathway or should it be a farm use? So a standalone preparation facility in that case that isn't associated with a farm operation, should it be allowable as a farm use, without necessarily a land use review maybe, unless it's to determine whether it meets the definition of farm use as Jim was stating earlier. All right, so we're at 10:30 now, and we do have a couple other topics that we would like to discuss. And so I'm going to encourage folks to, go ahead and provide written comments on sort of any other topics or with thoughts. Written comments with any other thoughts that you have on this topic. And definitely read the meeting notes and make sure that I've captured the conversation, your points in the conversation as you believe them to be. And I'll try to get those meeting notes out pretty quickly. So we do want to take just a quick little break, maybe only 3 minutes, and then we're going to go and talk about the evidentiary standard for verification of income. And then we're going to talk about parks. So why don't everybody let's just do a 3-minute break and meet back here so everybody has a chance to stretch or do whatever. All right, thank you.
Hey, Hillary, really fast on just a question on the meeting materials, because I was looking at the slide really fast. Was the proposed language for processing supposed to include the word packaging or exclude the word packaging?
So as noted in the meeting material, we just started with ODAI's definition.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah, as a point of discussion to start the discussion. We took the definition from ODA's rules and began there.
Okay, because I was just looking at the slide and then it didn't match. So I just wanted to make sure I understood what was actually proposed in the pre-materials.
Yeah, and I would have imagined that there are folks that would like, certain of those words removed or other words added. Maitri suggested that we move drying into preparation rather than processing. And I think I understand that definitely. And so again, I'm going to encourage folks to submit written comments with edits on that particular topic as well.
But the ones we should be, the language we should be looking at is as proposed in the meeting materials, not on the slide.
Yeah, if there was a difference that you noticed. Yeah, look at the language in the meeting materials again. That was provided. Just it's ODA's definition as a starting point for conversation.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right, so that was a very fast 4 minutes that went by. I'm wondering if most people are back yet. So go ahead and turn your camera on if you are back. All right, thanks, Amber. Thank you, Justin. And Jan and Mike. All right, looks like most people are back now. All right, so the next topic that we're going to talk about is the evidentiary standard for the verification of income. And actually, I've been surprised by the amount of interest in this topic. So counties take a wide variety of different approaches to verifying qualifying income for a couple of different uses. So for primary and accessory farm dwellings, where there's a need to verify income produced on those farm operations in order to qualify for a dwelling under an income test, as well as for some other things like the income threshold for farm stands, for example, or other types of activities which are intended to be subordinate to farm use. So on the slide with the dashes is a list of ways that counties verify income that was provided in response to an informal request through AOCPD, the Association of Oregon County Planning Directors. And many counties take some combination of approaches to verifying income in order to qualify for dwellings or at farm stands. So there is a form that farms use to report income to the IRS. It's IRS Schedule F. And so this often is used as a tool to verify income. Some folks have asked, it's difficult to use this form. We don't, know that it's been submitted. Some counties require applicants to provide their accounting records and review them. Some require simply an affidavit from the applicant. Some require an affidavit from a certified accountant. There are other provisions in statute which require, for example, the wineries that require CPA statements. Some counties require individual purchase and sale receipts or narrative descriptions of farm practices and income. So I thought I'd start this conversation by asking, county planners on the RAC how their jurisdiction approaches income verification, including for ongoing compliance, if that is something that you do, and how that approaches work for you. So is there a county planner who wants to start by talking how they approach this in your jurisdiction?
I'm happy to go first, Hillary.
Great, thanks, Amber.
So we don't have any specific evidence that we look for this evidentiary standard. We just look for substantial evidence. I've found that there are questions that come up. Some of the questions that are discussed in the packet regarding, things like whether if we're relying on a Schedule F, whether that has been filed. We had a situation come up recent, or an application in which the income was being cited for a part of a tax lot, a part of a tract. And so it was in that case, it was difficult to ascertain whether the Schedule F was specifically for that location within the larger property. But by and large, we just look for substantial evidence, and we don't have a specific requirement.
Okay. So, some sort of evidence, maybe from a variety of these sources.
Exactly.
Okay. Charles, I see you nodding along. Would you share how Jackson County looks at this?
Yeah, I would agree with Amber. I think what Jackson County does, we use an amalgam of evidence that's been submitted. It could be receipts of products. The Schedule F is great. I think Blair's comments about the IRS tax receipt return transcript is interesting, and we'll have to look at that if we can. That seems like that's a good source too. And we had that problem with on properties where the Schedule F doesn't. You can't identify if they have a larger farm operation, if the subject tract is the source of that income necessarily on that alone. The second part of that is the farm income, and then there's the verification through, for like a farm stand or something like that. I mean, I think the county's taken let the owner operator bear the responsibility of tracking the gross sales, and really we make it a condition of approval that they have to be able to demonstrate revenue for their events, have it available if there's a code compliance case. We're not, it's very difficult when you have these, submit annual, a CPA document annually from all these, tracking all these different types of, we don't really have that great follow-up. We really rely on the neighborhood and complaint driven to drive whether or not we need verification of it. So we put it as a condition. So we're a little more again bearing the responsibility on the owner operator to comply with the income threshold standards. So that's what I would have to say.
Yeah, thank you. So for the sort of ongoing obligation, it's complaint driven for enforcement, because it is really difficult to track when those when different permits need to submit those for review, is what I'm hearing you say. Okay, Maitri, how about Washington County?
So at Washington County, we take these Schedule F forms. We've had applicants provide income purchase and sale receipts, and also no, that was actually pretty much it. We either take the invoices or their accounting record. Yeah, that's right. The accounting records or the Schedule F forms. We typically don't encourage just an affidavit of income from the applicant or a narrative description, because if they're generating that kind of income, there should be some documentation somewhere. So we kind of really insist on that. But one of the issues mentioned was if it's if it's with a farm company, then it gets hard to that's the issue with the Schedule F form. If it's a company, then there's all these different parcels involved. So in that case, we kind of try to track down the proportionate acreage and the tax lots that would be tied to that income, and kind of condition that those tax lots cannot be used for qualifying any other primary farm dwelling. And yeah, we also, for the ongoing compliance, it's pretty much complaint driven really with events or with farm stands. It's a little hard to keep track of every single one. And we just follow up if there's any kind of complaint coming in the door.
Okay. So complaint-driven enforcement, again. All right, and then Alyssa, how does Lynn approach review?
Sorry. We approach it pretty much the same way all the other counties do, requiring Schedule F or an accountant verification of income when there's question of large farm tracts and where the various farm income's coming from, applicant narrative, showing receipts, stuff like that. And also the kind of continuing verification of income is similar to the other counties. It's kind of enforcement driven. We do have kind of like a tracking spreadsheet where we try to send out a yearly notice, but sometimes that's hit or miss on getting information back. But I would just echo the sentiments of all the other counties.
Okay. So you do try to provide yearly notice to applicants to encourage compliance with conditions of approval? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So Blair, you submitted comments that were in the meeting materials for this meeting. Did you want to discuss your proposal?
I would, but Amber and Austin and Mickey all had their hands up before me. I mean, you get to, if you want me to, I just don't want to jump ahead of them because they've been waiting.
All right, thank you. I can't see hands very well. So Amber?
Thanks. A real quick comment. I just wanted to circle back to Lane County's practices. We're similarly, we don't review the income tests on a regular basis. It's more code enforcement driven.
Okay.
So I've noticed in the draft language, that has an annual sales requirement, compliance certification. I think that could be beneficial for compliance purposes. I'm wondering if, the one comment I have there is that could be somewhat intensive or more intensive than what we currently look at in Lane County. And I'm wondering if that could be done and maybe on an every other year basis.
Okay.
And I also did want to ask really quickly under the primary dwelling standard, skipping ahead a little bit, whether under D, that is proposed to be an annual certification requirement as well.
No, that is not proposed as an annual certification requirement. Just to clarify.
Thank you.
All right, Austin. Sorry, we skipped you.
Oh no, you're fine. You're fine. I just wanted to add my thoughts. We do it similar to the other counties. Well, we'll take in theory any combination of those income verifications, but I kind of preface that with a grain of salt to people. If you give us a filed Schedule F and we can see that there's farm use on your property, you're golden. That's fine. But when we start getting into the other things, like I've had people submit letters from CPAs that just state that they have like literally 2 sentences, they have earned $80,000 of gross farm income, and we will deny based on that. If we're going to get something like that, we need to see pictures, evidence of the crop grown on the parcel. We'd like to see sales receipts. So that's kind of how we explain it to people, that if you're not going to give us a filed Schedule F, you need to give us a lot more substantial evidence using probably a couple of the other different ways. Sales receipts are good, inventories are good. But we've run into the problem, and this kind of happened with the Barth case at Luba last year, where technically they made the income for crops that were not actually harvested still on the ground, which that kind of opens up a whole nother thing is do we want to look at that portion? Because that makes it really hard for us. There's nothing in the, I look at farm use to saying it's harvested. The definition of farm use talks about harvested, and farm income talks about harvested. But then Luba kind of said, well, you don't really need to harvest it, which is a very, very interesting interpretation. It kind of makes stuff hard for us. But I just kind of want to add that it makes it easier for the county when we have solid information rather than CPA letters, because we've gotten letters that essentially mean nothing, and we don't really have a way to sort of to verify that the CPA or that any income was earned other than a letter says that. So that's kind of my bit on that. I've got more to talk about. I've got thoughts on this definition that's in front of us right here, but we can add that to the discussion later when we get there.
Okay. No, thank you, because I definitely want to know what would be helpful for counties, like in this regard, and your thoughts are. But we do have Mickey, Sam, Lauren, and then Rory. Okay, Mickey?
So I spent yesterday afternoon with down at my county talking to our administrator, going through the process. On dwellings, we have a stricter test, and the Schedule F is part of it, and something from a certified accountant. But it's all complaint driven, as they have said. But when we got into the one about farm stands, yada, 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 that part, he said it would be nice if the counties could be allowed to have a business license renewal, like if you do business in a city. And because now you get your permit and that's it, and then it's complaint driven, and you don't know what's going on unless there's a complaint and there's not funding to do enforcement. But if everybody had to file in the city, you'd have to renew your business license each year, and they'd come into the county and renew it. And the ones in violation, then the county would know because they didn't renew it. They would go out and check, and that would help them on that way, because the counties do provide services to operations that are extra expense, like law enforcement, fire protection, yada yada. And we talked about that in great detail. But he said the certified public accountant is just what Austin said, really isn't needed, because I mean, unless you get their whole tax thing and it's redacted, it's not. I mean, you get it's just what Austin said. It's what he said yesterday. I just wanted to share that with you guys because I did go do some research, and I thought it was interesting that once you get your original permit, then it's all complaint driven. But if there was a renewal each year, if the counties had the ability to do that, it would be the county's option. That would be nice. That's my comment.
All right, thank you, Mickey. So a suggestion that there be some sort of renewal requirement for some of those ongoing compliance standards. All right, Samantha, and then Lauren, and then Rory, then Mike, then Sid, then Blair.
So I have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure, Hillary, if it's easier for me to kind of state them all at once or just go one by one. I've got about 4 questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. My first question is, I think for the department, do you guys intend this language to be only for new farm stand applications, or is this a clarification for existing permittees?
This would be for new farm stand applications.
Okay. My next question is, have you guys begun the process to understand any of like the time or cost constraints this would put on farmers to prepare this?
So this is an ongoing requirement already, right? And so we are collecting information on how counties have been meeting the standard in the past, and we are very interested in hearing more opinions on how difficult this would be to meet.
Well, for your cost impact statement, you're going to have to identify that, correct? Because this is a new requirement, actually.
So it's a clarification of an existing requirement. This is how counties already are currently gathering evidence to meet the standard. And so we've heard from counties a desire to have a little bit more clarity around what's appropriate for this, and that's what this conversation is about.
Okay. I'm not sure I'm following that, because I think I'm hearing that from the counties previously that that's actually not what is happening. I'm not hearing that every farm stand operator is annually submitting written financials proactively. I think I heard the opposite of that.
Yes, that they are only responding to complaints and enforcement. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing as well.
So this would be a new requirement, and under the APA, for your cost impact statement, you would have to identify the potential costs to businesses that would come from the new rule. And so my question is, have you begun the process of soliciting that information of what this would cost farm stand operators to comply with this?
No, we haven't.
Okay, great.
I think one point of clarification is that this exists. I just don't think it's being enforced by counties, and people aren't going and doing this work because it's very tedious and takes a lot of staff time is the what's really happening.
So this is an existing rule?
So there's currently a requirement, right? That a certain amount of income earned at farm stands is limited, right? From the sale of retail, right? Instead of little items is limited to a certain percentage of the gross sales, and that's an ongoing requirement. And it is difficult for counties to verify that on an ongoing basis, is what we're hearing, that they only verify that.
this is a
subject to
new
enforcement.
this is a new rule that would require a written financial statement prepared by a certified public accountant to be submitted on an annual basis to the county. And there would presumably be a consequence if a farm stand operator did not provide that information
So
on that yearly basis.
this
Hillary, if I could, this is Gordon, if I could
Yeah.
clarify.
Thank you.
Yeah, Samantha, you raised an interesting point. We will be looking at this as part of the fiscal impact statement and, impact on small businesses. I think you're raising an interesting point, and we will respond to that at that point.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just trying to quantify impact here. And then my third question and fourth question are kind of twofold in that is like, what is the penalty or the consequence if a farm stand operator does not meet this requirement? And then what is the resource? You would also have to do this in your fiscal impact statement, your resource burden on local governments to receive this information on an annual basis, auditing that information, and then moving forth with enforcement based upon that. Because this is a pretty significant shift in enforcement from how things are currently taking place on the landscape.
So I think those are all good suggestions for consideration going forward. Thank you, Samantha.
Okay, those are questions, and I'm wondering if I could get a response to those either in writing or at a later meeting.
Yes, we will work on that. Thank you. All right, Lauren.
Thanks. So yeah, I agree with Samantha in that there's a difference in requiring that you keep the records, the income records, and as opposed to, and then, providing them when asked for compliance purposes and having to supply them every year after being prepared by a CPA. That's difference. And we have that sort of nuance in many areas of the law. For example, if I have a water right, I'm required to keep track of it. I don't have to report it, so like that's a nuance in the law. So that would be a difference and a new thing. So we do need to know what that costs because our farmers have a lot of cost burden. And so we don't want to add an additional burden onto them that is going to cost them a lot of money. Additionally, I guess my other concern is how is this information and data, if it is going to be required to be submitted to a public entity every year, protected? So how is the privacy of the farm operator then protected? How will it be used? Who will have access to that information and for what purpose? If they're submitting their income to a public entity every year.
Okay, so I'm hearing that your concern is that the private information may be contained in tax records be protected. What are the mechanisms for that? That's a very good question. So I just want to clarify that the requirement in rule right now is that the annual sales of incidental items and fees from the promotional activity do not make up more than 25% of the total annual sales of the farm stand. So that is a condition. And what we're hearing, and we have heard a lot of concern around the enforcement mechanism for ensuring that that condition is met going forward, or if there is really any actual substance to that aspect of the rule. So definitely in hearing a concern that this might impose an additional cost burden on a farm stand operator, and wanting to understand what that looks like. And I'm also hearing, Lauren, thank you, that there's a concern that any private information may be kept that way. All right, we'll move on to Rory, then Mike, then Sid, then Blair, then Olivier, and then Justin.
Thanks, Hillary. A couple of quick points. One is that I don't see this as a new obligation or burden, largely because of what you just said. It exists in rule, but mainly every land use decision must be supported by substantial evidence. So submitting something, as we just heard from the county, to back up a statement that you're meeting this standard is not a new requirement. I think what we're trying to do here is create more of a clear and objective, a standard here that everyone can rely on. So there aren't questions and we can minimize appeals. And then I also wanted to back up what Austin said with, a lot of experience of mine in the region I work. We often see those 2-sentence CPA letters that don't answer the really vital questions about where the income came from, if it's a business entity that might own multiple properties, or the answer the question, the source of the income, if it's a individual or business entity that has multiple sources of income, which many, if not most, do. So as written now, I don't think it's quite adequate just to say written statement. I think we need to somehow include what that statement contains and how it's backed up rather than just an assertion.
All right, thank you, Rory. So Mike, then Sid, then Blair, then Olivier, then Justin.
Yeah, I have a couple comments to make on both the $80,000 type test and farm stands. What I see in Hood River County, watching this for over 40 years, is there's a lot of cheating going on and a lot of unfairness. And the more you cheat, the more you get. And I don't think that's an appropriate system. I don't think it's what we want. And what it means is decent law-abiding citizens don't get to do what other people get to do. And I don't think, I really have a hard time finding a reason why someone would justify that system. And that's the current system we have now. And so I was actually on the committee of the $80,000 test. We thought it was a great test, but it needs to be verified in a very strong manner. So again, so there's not cheating. And I think we need to call that out, that that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about restricting somebody's ability to do something. I think we should have a standard form. And I think we should have a standard form for both the farm stand and the income test. And you put the 3 requirements, and I believe there should be 3 for the income test. One is your tax return that's a signed transcript, and that would have, in most cases, Schedule F and the 1040 line 6 on Schedule 1, which has farm income. Also a site visit, and then some verification of proof of receipt of income. Those 3 things should be on that test. Then on the farm stands, we in an organization I'm in Hood River County have very carefully looked at a number of farm stands and some of those that are permitted as commercial uses, commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. In almost every case, we find violations of the conditions of approval. And we have looked very carefully at the 25% test. And unfortunately, that's a very difficult one to get to the bottom of. But we see cases where people are not nearly meeting the requirement. And to me, it's very obvious that the intent of a farm stand is for you to sell principally your own products. And in many cases, that's not happening. And certainly that's the intent. And if you're not going to do that, there's really no point in having it on a farm. It should be in a community, should be in town. But I think that annual reporting should be required. And we talk about the difficulty of that. One of the ones we reviewed was they very simply, their point of sale entry into their computer point of sale at their facility, they clearly designated which ones they were, whether they are incidental sales or whether they were qualifying sales. And it was a very simple form to print out. The unfortunate thing is they can cheat that system too, which in this case they did for some time. But I believe it's not a burden for them to print out a point of sale. There's no extra cost for that. And if it's a real small farm stand, In those cases, and an example I have is one Hillary might be familiar with in Tillamook County. The Josie's farm stand to me is the perfect farm stand. It's 100% things that they produced right across the street from where the farm stand is. And that's obviously, I don't think you need any verification there really, or it would be very easy for them to do. But those are the main things I have to comment on. I think there should be annual reporting on the 25% for farm stands, and it should be also a standard form. Standard form with certain things on it that are identified. And I notice here on a Schedule 1040, it says at the bottom, I signed this under penalty of perjury. I believe that statement should also be on the form they fill out. And the reason I think all of this is the amount of cheating that's going on. And we're having basically grocery stores in the farm zone that produce almost nothing that they sell. And this is something we need to get a handle on. I just don't think anybody can really believe that this kind of cheating is really appropriate.
All right, great. Thank you, Mike. Sid and then Blair.
Thank you, Hillary. Our observations here in Yamhill County are very similar to Mike McCarthy's in River County. There is a real need for a standardized, these are state rules, there needs to be a standardized methodology for verifying income and determining income across the board. So it's not one standard in one county, a different standard in another, based on what they accept as proof of compliance or evidence of compliance. Looking first at the income test for a primary farm dwelling, I'm curious to hear Blair's proposal, or what Blair has to say, but there is the need for a IRS tax return transcript is really essential. Otherwise, it's the evidence is too easily gained. One of the county planners, I think it was Austin, also mentioned the problem of the Barth decision and the need to ensure that income is actually produced, has been produced, that it's not, or excuse me, the crops have actually been produced, or the livestock or whatever, that it isn't what we had 30 years ago, 40 years ago, essentially a promise to farm, a promise to produce the farm product at some point in the future. And that also highlights the need for transactions to be for the primary farm dwelling income test, for the transactions to be arm's length transactions, what a willing seller and purchaser at arm's length would pay. So you don't have situations where somebody sells a hay bale to a family member for $80,000. Well, that's an exaggeration, but you know where I'm going with that. Turning to the farm stand provisions, yes, we see the same thing Mike sees here in Yamhill County. We really do need annual reporting or semi-annual reporting. And we also, I think, need to consider what one of the county planners, mentioned, I think it was a county planner, periodic renewal of the permit, so that as with any business license that needs renewal, there is a periodic reexamination about whether or not the criteria are met. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Sid. Then we have Blair, Olivier, Justin, and then Austin.
Thank you, Hillary. I am with Sid and Mike and their observations. We want to focus primarily on the verification of income for the primary and accessory farm dwellings. And it was I remember with Mike that when the $80,000 gross income standard was adopted, it never crossed our minds of the creativity of applicants and showing how that was met. And sort of watching Marion County go through the Barth case was an eye-opener. And there were sales receipts. There was a Schedule F for one of the years, but not for both years. There was a site visit, but it was failed because the county staff could not see the product. It was behind a rise in the landscape. So the county could sense that it wasn't right. And the hearings officer could sense that it wasn't right, but they didn't really have the tools because there was nothing clear about how you show the standard. So I think sort of helping that with very clear, and we're not talking about changing the standard, but like, how do you prove the standard? So we've talked to a bunch of people over years. It's a tough question because the Schedule F by itself sounds like a marvelous solution, but you could go to the post office and get a Schedule F and fill it out and submit it to the county. That doesn't really show that you've earned that income and that you filed it with the IRS. So some tax attorneys said there's this wonderful tool online that you can pick up called an IRS business tax receipt. And you just go online, you press it, and you print it out, and it shows all of the schedules that you filed in your main forms. And if you were, and they're used often when you're applying for a mortgage, banks will require them as proof of income. It's a standard proof of income in different environments where you need to prove up income. Because this is a public process and privacy of the applicant is important, it can be redacted, right? You can just have the parts that show the income and that it comes from the farm. So it seems to be the most mischief-proof form of actual income. The other issues that different planners and farmers have raised in terms of which property it comes from, sales receipts, however, that's photographs, site visits are all super helpful to help verify the other components of the test and where it comes from. But the actual income, it seems to me this is a marvelous, easy tool that can also be managed in a way to protect the privacy of the applicant.
Great, thank you, Blair. And in order to obtain that IRS business tax receipt, it's just a button on the IRS website that you print and push out, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So I think if the commission is interested, if the department wants to ask the commission to consider this, you could prepare materials where it is so people could go and understand how this works and be comfortable with the process.
Right. Thank you, Blair. So then we had Olivier, Justin, and then Austin, and then Samantha. So,
Thanks. Thanks, Larry. So I'll touch on some of the comments that were raised earlier about, the other side of it is the impact that whatever way of requiring here has on farmers and especially small farmers. And I know, with wineries that we've worked with wine counties and they've accepted that to submit annual income statement and a cover letter from licensed CPA when questions arise around food service and incidental sales, for example. And we think that's pretty adequate to prove up income and income categories. Some of the other measures that are being proposed here would impact small farmers again and have kind of a disproportionate impact on some that don't always have resources to hire professionals navigating the different rules that we're talking about here. Similarly, I think, making it a mandatory reporting, I think would be a new requirement as Sam mentioned earlier. And, so far it's been something that permittees provide to the county upon requests. And, at least in the case of wineries that we worked with, that's worked well. And I haven't seen the type of cheating or blurring the lines that people are talking about here. So those are some of the things we're looking at, is that annual income statement and a cover letter from licensed CPA, and make it available upon a request by the county. That has worked well to prove some of that. The other issues that we have is that the language currently restricts the gross income earned from land owned as opposed to leased or rented. And again, I think we have a little bit of an equity concern here, because it shouldn't matter whether the person owns the farmland or the land that some of the products are coming from. It could also be a lease or be an operator of that land. Specifically on the farm stand issue, with wineries, farm stand are pathway for vineyards and wineries to showcase products that are made of the farm use when it's made from the permitted vineyard. And we don't think it matters whether the vineyard is on site or off site, whether it's by ownership, a lease, or long-term contract. So those come the issue, the restriction to farm to land owned, and then the impact on small farmers as we impose additional requirements and require them to hire additional resources on board. I get some of the concerns that others are expressing, with some folks kind of pushing the boundaries, but the other side is the impact that has on small farmers who are trying to use the rules and are doing, submitting appropriate information to the counties when required. So those are some of the comments we had here.
So thank you, Olivia. So I just wanted to confirm. So I'm hearing from you that you feel like for wineries that the annual provision of the CPA statement or having that available on request has been working well. And then I think your other comment was on the dwelling and the language for primary farm dwellings that requires that the income be earned from land owned and not, additional land that is not owned, or opened up to land that is also leased by a farm operator, in order to qualify a dwelling.
Yeah.
Which was not contemplated at all as part of our, okay. All right, we have Justin and then Austin.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm not sure if this is, if we're just looking at language, it's language, but kind of high level. Having somebody verify something every year is, is asking somebody to do work every year. Then you need on the agency side someone to review that, someone to verify that the enforcement then becomes, did they submit the report, and is the results of the report in compliance with the requirements? And that takes staff resources. And then, thinking about, is this a paper submittal, electronic submittal? I mean, electronic submittal is going to be the easiest because you have systems now that can verify compliance with information submitted, but that's not cheap. And so having ran, multiple regulatory programs in the past at the state level, this has the potential to be a very big investment. And the last thing when I was running programs, the last thing I wanted to do was ask somebody to submit to me something that I knew I didn't have the resources to review and verify. And then you subject that person then to third-party lawsuits that say, oh, well, they didn't submit this report, and it creates its own snowball. So one of the workarounds of that is to figure out where a regulated entity is submitting information already, and see if there's an entity, is it a revenue department that gets this information and can do its own verification, so that you're not duplicating efforts, you're not creating a whole new regulatory program. So that was just my perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Austin. And so would you prefer to see language that sort of that mimicked the winery statutes that require it be available on request of the county?
I mean, that is the light touch regulatory method used in environmental programs. It's the record keeping aspect. Have this record there so that when we do an inspection, either it be a regularly scheduled inspection or a complaint inspection, that information is there. That reduces kind of this vulnerability to third-party lawsuits, which can be third-party lawsuits can be well intended and meaningful, and other times they're just ancillary attacks on an entity that for other reasons. So but either way, you're asking somebody to do something that if you're not actually going to use as an agency, it's tough to ask somebody to do something that you're not, that's basically meaningless.
Yeah, great. All right. So Sid, I see you took your hand down. So we'll do Samantha, Jim, and then Mike.
Sorry. I just have a couple of comments and a question. I mean, one, I just want to flag, I really would encourage our RAC to not use some of the language that was used earlier, you know, calling people cheaters, essentially liars. It's not appropriate. It's not appropriate from a policymaking standpoint and the decorum that I think we should be held to in these RACs. And it also impugns the integrity of a lot of people in a generalized way that's really harmful. I represent a lot of people who have farm stands, and I'm engaged in a number of policy conversations right now about the current standards. And a lot of people will tell you that the standards as they currently are extremely difficult to comply with. And that's not because people are trying to cheat a system, it's because of ag economics. And it's because it's not as easy to just earn a living in traditional farming the way it was in 1973. So I think by assuming that people are, quote, you know, lying or cheating their way through a system, it's just not appropriate. And I don't think that should be the basis of our decision making. I think if there's, you know, a desire for greater enforcement and fair enforcement, that's fine. But to do it in the way that's been talked about today, I just don't think is appropriate. And second, I think Olivier has raised a number of times the issues of equity. And that was actually something I wanted to flag at the beginning of the meeting, but I have forgot to ask as kind of a housekeeping item. At what point are we going to be reviewing this through the department's equity lens and racial equity framework? Because I've noticed like it doesn't seem that any of that was discussed during the technical work group, which is really where I think the initial policy conversations happened. And so I'm not sure why that technical work group didn't kind of get into the potential equity factors related to goal 3 or 4. And at what point are we going to be doing that in this program?
So thank you, Samantha. In July, we will be reviewing the fiscal impact statement as well as the racial and equity impact statement for the rulemaking. And that was a consideration that was looked at both in the project planning and was discussed by the technical working group. And, you know, one of the sort of key discussion points was that having more consistent rules that are, or more clear rules that are more consistently implemented across the state is more equitable. So that was a sort of general principle underlying like this initial effort as well. Is going for that clarity and consistency.
To clarify, is that review the same as the department's racial equity framework that's guiding all of their decision making?
So yes, we've written documents addressing that as it relates to this framework. If you would like copies of those, they're available, and there's some discussion of that in the technical working group summary report, which I'm assuming you've reviewed. And again, in July, we will be reviewing the impact statements as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Jim, and then Mike.
Yeah, I've heard several references to small farms, I'm assuming that they're trying to distinguish small farms from the rest of Oregon agriculture. And I think it's really important to understand that Oregon is a small farm state in general. We are not corporate agriculture. 95% of Oregon agriculture is family farms. In fact, 71.4% of Oregon's farms, farm land area and farms, the farms generate over $100,000 or more a year. The USDA considers a commercial farm to be something that generates $250K a year. So yes, we have small farms in Oregon, but hobby farms versus commercial farms are different stories here. And remember, what we're looking at here is protecting the commercial agricultural base for Oregon agriculture. So there are a lot of small farms in terms of numbers in Oregon. They wouldn't necessarily meet the definition of a farm in a lot of cases. They probably only make maybe $1,000 or more a year. Those are probably lifestyle farms, but they show up in the Census of Agriculture. When you look at the footprint of Oregon agriculture, though, over 70% of the farms in terms of land area and the like generate more than 100K. So I just want us to take in context what is the character of Oregon agriculture. And small farms, I don't know what that means unless it's defined or whatever. But I wanted to bring that up. And then in terms of Blair's comments, I support Blair Batson's comments. I was at DLCD and did a lot of the drafting of the original 80K test. And what Blair's talking about is really where the LCDC ultimately went with that and what they were trying to do. And one of the reasons that we went to an 80K standard and a 40K standard and the like was trying to get some objectivity and make it easier to determine and enforce. So this discussion on how to justify the 80,000 test or the 40,000 test is right on point in terms of where the commission originally was talking about. And Mike, I know you were on that committee too, so you might want to relate to that. But you know, that's the bottom line on all that. And so I do support Blair Batson's comments in terms of how to confirm the 80,000 or the 40,000 or whichever number we're working at, because that's really what we're trying to do here.
All right, thank you, Jim. All right, Austin, then Matry, and we do have one more topic to get to today that I'm hoping to move on to after this. So, but I would definitely want to hear from you guys.
Hillary, I believe I was the next, but I could be wrong.
So sorry, Mike.
I actually was before Samantha, but got skipped over back then.
Go ahead.
No, it's all good. It's all good. We got a lot of people. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on really quick. I generally really agree with Mike, Sid, and Blair's comments about needing to verify that taxes were paid, crops were actually grown and harvested on site, because you know, we do see a lot of people trying to fudge that information. And I do think it is important to recognize that people are trying to cheat the system. They are lying to us. So I think using that language is still appropriate. We do specific training here at Marion County for our new planners, working the counter to try to identify people lying, giving misinformation. Probably 50% of your work as a planner at the counter, especially in an agricultural area like this, is trying to see if the information presented is true. Is it accurate at all? We get lots of crazy stories. We get a lot of crazy proposals. Unfortunately, we do get a lot of people lying and cheating. So I think that language is correct to use, because we do see it a lot. And one of the reasons why we do see that language a lot is we all know there's no land use jail. You can submit a land use application with the most ridiculous, untruthful information, and all you're going to do is get a denial in the mail if we find that information to be incorrect. So that stuff is really prevalent, and something that I feel like as land use has kind of gotten to the 21st century that's dealt with a lot more. I do think it'd be good to have delivery receipts about crops. You know, if you actually harvested a crop and hauled it off site, is there a delivery receipt for someone receiving those goods or that crop? And in regards to kind of protecting tax info, if we were going to collect more tax info and things like that, at Marion County, what our practice is we collect it, we put it in part of the file. We don't send it to anyone. We don't send it in a request for comments. We don't scan it online. It's just in the file so planners can look at it. And if requested, someone can come to us at the county and look at it as well. But that's it. So we don't send it out to everyone. And I think another thing to think about when we're talking about kind of having a higher burden of proof, or maybe just a clearer burden of proof for this income, is that if you're legitimately farming and it's not hard to prove income. If you make over $80,000 gross a year on your farm, it's not hard to prove that income if you've got a business and you're paying taxes. It's actually one of the most simple applications we do. When people come in that have a farm that are trying to establish a dwelling and everything is cut and dry and as it should be, it's a really easy application. It's not hard to show the income or quantify that income. And what we do is we don't do annual reports, but once established, we have a condition in there that basically on all land use cases, it says if requested by the planning director for farm stands, please show the 75-25% split of your income. If it's for a farm dwelling, what we say is that farm dwelling must continually be occupied by a farm operator. And so if you're renting it out to someone who's not working on the farm, you're now in a code compliance situation. So that's how kind of Marion County handles it. because it is a lot of work if you were going to have annual reports from people sending information, financial information. We kind of see this a lot with medical hardships. We do annual renewals for medical hardships, and that in of itself is a really big lift. So adding income verification would be another big lift, probably require a new position to be added, but it's not impossible. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is that I know it's not part of the charge, but I do think the land should be owned that you're trying to establish these dwellings on and using income from. Because if you're not owning that land, and let's say someone were to sell it and potentially cancel your lease on that land or something of that nature, the land you've used to qualify for these farm dwellings is not you may not be able to farm anymore, so you may not be able to justify needing that many employees or workers or dwelling units because you don't actually own that land and you can't farm it anymore if someone sells it or chooses to do something else with it. So those are kind of the thoughts that I've gotten from this, but I do think there needs to be a very clear standard of income verification because we do see a lot of people coming at us with very inspired ideas, as I call it, on income, and it makes it very tough for the county to try to figure out what's right, what's wrong in these situations and grant houses to people. Because we don't want to be too restrictive on housing, but we also want to make sure that, people that are doing things legally can get their houses legally and not be, second in line to people who are giving false information on applications.
Right. Thank you, Austin.
Hillary,
So-
before we go on, I just want to say let's not get into too much into what the motives of people are, whatever they are. We're here to talk about a response to a state provision and how or why people deal with that issue is really, let's not, it's going down the wrong path. Let's talk about how we resolve this issue, not the motives of the people who are using the system now. That's just a thought.
I will just say that those motives of the people are what got us into making this language right now, though. It's all about what the people apply for.
All right, thank you. All right, Mike and then Matry, and if we can be pretty quick because we do want to talk about private parks, but I also want to hear what you have to say.
I very much appreciate Austin's comments. That's what we see. If you don't want to call it cheating and unfairness or lying, we can call it non-compliance and illegal activity, which it is. And I think it's very important to know how much of that's going on when we attempt to fix the language and put language in that makes it easier for planners to do their job. And Samantha brought up the idea of racial equity and so forth. I brought that up a number of times. And partly I brought it up because I believe that it should be fair across the board and everybody should go to the planning office with clear language with equal expectations of what they'll get and not people with very, as Austin puts it, very inspired ideas. And I think the equity idea is that everybody gets treated fairly. And there's some other things about equity that we discussed during the process. So we did do that. You can never do enough of that, but we spent some time on that. The other thing I wanted to say in terms of the cost to counties and individuals running these businesses to actually show compliance with the law doesn't concern me too much. I much prefer that method than me having to do it because some interference with my farming operation by somebody who's non-compliant. And this happens often throughout the state of Oregon where non-compliant activities interfere with farming and it costs the farmers a lot of money and a lot of time. And I don't believe that complaint-driven process is the right way to go. I don't believe that's how I should have to spend my time to keep farming.
All right, thank you, Mike. And then Matry, and then we are going to move into our next topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly follow up on the proposed farm stand revision, and I appreciate that being proposed and wanted to lend support to the language being similar to that used for wineries, where the county may require the CPA documentation. A lot of the times we see farm stands that are actually just farm stands and don't really feel the need to require a documentation from them, but some of them it seems like they propose a farm stand just as a pretext to host events that kind of seem out of proportion. So having the flexibility to require it on an as-needed basis allows us to exercise some discretion and not create a financial burden where it's undue. And that's pretty much what I had to say.
Great. Thank you very much, Mantri. So again, additional thoughts on these topics, please go ahead and submit written comments, and please, take a careful look at the meeting notes that will be circulated to make sure that we've captured the conversation correctly here. All right, so for the next 20 minutes or so, let's talk about private parks. So a little bit of background on this. There are actually quite a wide variety intensity of activities that are proposed as private parks in resource zones. So specific approved private park uses that have been reported to the department over the years include airsoft courses, paintball parks, frisbee golf, shooting ranges, gun clubs, demonstration gardens, events venues, and motocross tracks. So again, the technical working group that met over the last part of 2023 expressed concern that it might be unclear when proposals for private parks become inappropriate for a rural environment, and it may not be quite clear what is appropriately considered a park. And so the suggestion was the department consider rulemaking to define uses allowable as private parks, including the scale intensity. So the department actually suggested starting with a more narrowly focused approach, looking at, capturing some of the guidance from a 2015 Court of Appeals decision. So our charge from the commission actually focuses just on clarifying the recreational nature of parks related to that case. And so I do know that there are several members of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee who would like to do more with this definition, but before we hear more on that particular topic, I'd like actually to start by asking folks, if there are folks on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee who feel like this language from the Court of Appeals is too limiting for what should be considered a private park. So private parks are a sub-2 use. There are no standards in statute or rule from them beyond the words private park. But they are subject to a farm impacts test review and any other conditional use standard that county may apply to them. Counties may choose to not allow them, but most counties do allow them. All right, so are there any folks who would like to sort of start off with concerns that this goes too far in defining what a recreational park might be, or too limiting? No, okay. Then I would love, Jim, did you want to start?
Well, I don't have a lot to, I think this is fine. I just wanted to relate, in my work with right to farm and conflicts with farm use, I probably get more complaints from farmers on things that are related to recreation that's impacting their ability to farm than almost anything else, beyond maybe non-farm dwellings and the like. So having a definition here to say, and when you look at the definition of park in the definition, it talks about things like low intensity outdoor recreational uses. It doesn't talk about go-kart tracks, off-road vehicle use, paintball parks, miniature golf courses, and like all of things that I've had seen proposed over my career as private parks on farmland. That just to me is really stretching what a park really is. And when you look at this, what is a public park? The difference between a public park and a private park, one's public and one's private, possibly. So why are we saying with a private park you can do a lot more than you could in a public park? Just something to think about.
And just to clarify, public parks are may also be subject to standards in Division 34. Mickey, and then Rory. Mickey, did you want to offer your comments on the use? I think we lost her. So Rory, do you want to go ahead while we're waiting for Mickey to come back?
Yeah, thanks, Hillary. So Jim touched there on in the second half of his comment on the difference between a private and a public park. And Hillary, if you wanted to wait until a little later for this conversation, feel free to cut me off. But I did send in a written comment on that point that you sent out in the packet a few days ago. And the Court of Appeals decision that we're taking this definition of park from also discusses what the meaning of private is in private park, because that was a key issue in that case. That Land Watch, Central Oregon Land Watch was the petitioner in, and the court provided some very helpful clarifying language that to make a park private, it has to be for use by a particular group or class of persons. I think that language needs to be in this proposed new section to fully give meaning to the phrase private park as interpreted by the Court of Appeals.
Okay, thank you. And so the proposed revision from Central Oregon Land Watch would be to add that phrase at the end of this red line language here that is, targeted at that specific group or of persons or people or persons. All right, Mickey, and then Charles, and then Sid, and then Matri.
Okay, I hit the wrong button and my iPad went down.
No.
So I had to plug it in. You have to feed the beast. So I have struggled with this because I do not envision what all is being allowed as a public park. They're event facilities. They're not what I envision as a park. I support what Rory suggested and sent in. And, where I grew up and where I still own a farm in Eastern Oregon, we have a private park, but it's not designated a private park. We just go down on Pine Creek, and there's big 100-year-old trees, and there's blackberries, and there's thickets, and there's great picnicking area, and you would think you were up in the mountains. But I can understand dogs, need to be in the country. I can understand, but not paint. I mean, the whole thing, what Jim said, it just befuddles me. Hillary knows because I sent her comments that said, I'm really struggling on this. What is a private park? So I support what Roy sent in as a base to go from there. I think that would help with the definition, and it needs to be what it's supposed to be, a private park, not an event facility.
All right, thank you, Mickey. Charles, then Sid, then Matri. Charles?
Yes, thank you. I have the county has a definition of private park, and I'll add that in the written comments. So we don't have to get into that. But I think I'm a little concerned with Rory's proposal in the sense of confusing the fact between a private and public component. Because in that land use case, I thought it was pretty clear that it may be open to a private park, it may be open to the general public. So versus a private, so there was the distinction that they made that it can be open to the general public. They also made the point about the focal events. So that's what you guys are talking about as well. Mickey is mentioning that you're not supposed to have, private parks are not, they can have an accessory of a focal event, but it's not the purpose of it. So I guess those are my comments on that subject.
All right, thank you, Charles. And so there might be some confusion on, what is private versus public, when private parks are open to the general public. And so there's some concern about clarification there. Sid?
I support the proposed language, and I also support what I believe to be the intent of Rory's addition. I'm not sure I'm not sure I'm not sure the actual language that Rory has proposed, though, it's clear as to the objective of what's we want to achieve. I understand that the Court of Appeals used that language in its decision, but the Court of Appeals went on to say that what was objectionable was that the petitioner sought to rent out their lawn for events. So I think rather than saying a particular group or class of persons, which I think a lot of people won't understand when they're reading that language in an ordinance, it would be better to say as a necessary component in the primary focus period, a private park does not include rental facilities or areas to be rented out for private events or something like that. I don't have the right language, but I think you see where I'm going with it.
Mm-hmm. So did you want to submit that as a written comment?
I can do that. And maybe Rory, maybe I'll get in touch with you and we can see what might work.
Right,
If that's agreeable to you, or maybe you'll convince me that your language is the right language.
Okay, thank you. Maitri?
So, yeah, for Washington County, we don't see too many requests for parks in the Farm Resource District, CFU and AF20, because they're limited to non-high value soils. But we do see a bunch for the EFC district. And I feel like with this definition, it may be broadened a bit. Maybe it can accommodate some uses, but not those that start dominating over the existing or the potential farmer forest use on site. So like instead, they shouldn't be allowed to take down a huge chunk of timber to say establish a soccer field or something. And it feels like on just reading this new definition, it kind of seems like when we're saying land in its natural state, it almost seems very restrictive to not allowing any improvements at all. So maybe a little bit of leeway there. And circling back to the case law where it talks about events, I'm assuming they will be allowed to some extent as long as they're not the primary use of the park. So that again brings us back to the incidental and subordinate factor. So in this case, then will there be clear standards to follow, perhaps a limit on the number of events that can be allowed or the scale of the events?
And so, Maitri, so I was just to recap there, you had some concern that this description might be a little bit more restrictive by defining private park as something that's outdoor, recreational, and requiring outdoors, open space, or land in its natural state. That might be interpreted as precluding development. And then the other part of your comment was really a question about, how do you determine what is the primary focus? Is that right?
Well, I mean, it's not hard. Well, yes, I guess. I mean, that's part of the concern. I mean, how do we set the limit on what makes the events subordinate to the primary use of the park, which is supposed to be recreation?
So in the case where there may also be events as part of a park proposal, like how do you determine that they don't become the primary focus? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. I think we've got your comments captured there. All right, and then Mike.
Yeah, I kind of want to go along with Sid's language that he's proposing. I think it's very important to keep it limited. I do think that it's important to leave in the language in its natural state. I can envision farmland and forest land having pretty significant alterations that will prevent it from ever being in its original state again or used as farm and forest. And I see that as a real issue on some of these. And I also think that this private park thing should be as limited as possible because this is the type of thing that gets to be a real problem for neighboring farms and forests. You get a lot of stuff going on in one place that's recreational, and pretty soon they're recreating on your place. And I'm quite familiar with that in Hood River County. We have an awful lot of recreational use that takes place in our farm and forest land. So I just think it's really important to keep this as limited as possible. I don't think it should be fee-based in any way. I don't think that even the owner should be able to charge a fee, and I think that would naturally keep it limited. And I don't know if is it allowed to be fee-based? That would be my question.
So currently, most of the private park proposals that aren't, they are sort of membership or fee-based sort of activities as they've been reported. All right, Rory, did you have a comment? Follow-up comment?
Yeah,
Mhm.
thanks, Hillary. So on the open space and natural state language in the proposed rule here, that I think, comes directly from the court's decision too, and the court spent a lot of time distinguishing from other common uses of the word park, like amusement park, which is of course a very developed, built up thing. And the court really looked to, this is a sub-2 conditional use, which, previous precedent says courts should construe those uses narrowly to be the most protective of farm and forest land. And that's why they came up with the language that you've now incorporated in the draft rule here. Like they're interpreting the word park to not encompass that much broader use that we sometimes see, like amusement park, but to be that more narrower traditional sense of parkland, which they found to be in a natural or open state. And then Sid's point was well taken about potential confusion that could come by just tacking on that phrase at the end of the definition that I proposed in the written comment. And yeah, I think it probably could be better to have a separate sentence that says, a private park is available or is not available for use or rental by a member of the general public, but is limited to use by a particular group or class of persons. So something like that could work.
All right. And again, it would be helpful to have that in as a written comment as well, for the record. And Mike, did you raise your hand again for a final comment? Or was that lingering?
Sorry, no, I didn't.
Okay. All right, great. So we're just about to the end of our time here. So I wanted to just reiterate that our next meeting at June 11th, we are going to be discussing the alignment of the rectangular template test. And so if you have questions on that or comments on that, please go ahead and forward those and apologies for any confusion there. We've already gotten some comments on the rectangular test alignment for folks to consider. We'll be providing a little bit more background information on that in the meeting packet. And we'll also be discussing what we have sometimes been calling multi-path permitting. So the charge language from the commission there is clarify whether uses in Chapter 215 of statute or OAR 660-06-25 may or may not alternatively be reviewed as home occupations and also as commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. So I expect that will be a very robust conversation. So most of our next meeting will be devoted to that. Again, in July, we're going to be discussing approaches to replacement dwellings, and we will be asking you to review and comment on the fiscal impact and racial equity impact statements. And we will review final edits to proposed rule language at that July meeting. So again, as we're going along, department staff will be considering all of your suggestions that we're collecting through these discussions and through written comments. And we'll discuss those in July. And the intention is that in August, we'll produce a notice of proposed rulemaking. And there's going to be 2 hearings on the rulemaking, one in late September with the adoption hearing in December. So it's possible that the commission may ask us to meet again in October as well. I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that possibility. So until the next meeting in June, we'll be sending out meeting notes. Please review them carefully and make sure that your comments in the discussion are accurately reflected. And if you have additional comments on this topic that we discussed today, these 3 topics that we discussed today, we would love to have those in writing, and they would be in the packet for the next meeting. Again, when you send in comments, please let me know if they are for our consideration, if you want them to be published with the rest of the packet. Charles, do you have a question on the next steps?
Yes, thank you. Do you have a deadline that you'd like to have comments from about today's subjects?
Not yet. I will send that out in my follow-up email. But our next meeting is actually June 11th is coming up pretty quickly. We try to get those materials out more than a week in advance. And so in order to include those in that meeting packet and give time people to review, we would need them, before, what is it, June, before June 4th or really the 31st, but I will clarify that in the follow-up email from this meeting. All right. Are there any other questions about next steps or the process going forward? No. All right. Well, thank you all for a robust discussion today, and we will look forward to seeing you in June.
Thank you, Hillary.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hillary.
Thanks, Hillary.